The radio crackled with static across the Afghan valley at 3:47 hours, but Captain Nix Valdez wasn't listening to communications anymore. She was listening to something else entirely, the absence of sound that preceded death. Her Apache helicopter hung motionless 3,000 feet above the Helmand province, rotors beating a steady rhythm that should have been comforting but felt like a countdown instead. Below, the terrain stretched endlessly, a moonscape of jagged ridges and hidden valleys where entire armies could disappear without trace. Ghost Actual, this is Overwatch. We've lost contact with Bravo Team. Last known position Grid 41 SMD 12,340 567,890. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, a man who'd never trusted her judgment and made no secret of it. His words carried the weight of accusation even through encrypted channels. Nix adjusted her night vision display, scanning the green-tinted landscape for any sign of movement. The missing patrol had been radio silent for 47 minutes, an eternity in hostile territory. Standard protocol demanded she maintain position and wait for backup, but something in her gut twisted with urgency. She'd felt this same premonition exactly once before, during her first tour in Iraq, when her instincts had saved an entire convoy from a roadside bomb. Overwatch, Ghost Actual. Request permission to investigate last known coordinates. The pause stretched longer than tactical communication allowed. She could almost hear Webb's jaw tightening, could picture him weighing his options in the command trailer 8 miles away. Captain Nix Valdez, call sign Ghost, had earned her reputation through precision strikes and an uncanny ability to appear where enemies least expected her. But Webb still saw her as the cocky young pilot who transferred from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment under circumstances he considered suspicious. Negative Ghost, maintain current position. Blackhawk support inbound, ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. In hostile territory, that might as well be 12 hours. Nix's co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Danny Reeves, caught her eye through the cockpit's reflection. His weathered face held the expression of someone who'd flown enough missions to recognize the difference between following orders and doing what was right. He'd been her wingman for 8 months, long enough to trust her instincts even when command didn't. "Your call, Ghost," he said quietly, his voice not transmitted. Below them, the valley held its secrets close. Somewhere in that darkness, 6 American soldiers might be fighting for their lives, or they might already be dead. The distinction would be determined by the next decision she made, and Captain Nix Valdez had never been one to choose the safe option when lives hung in the balance. Her finger hovered over the radio transmit button. The night sky above seemed to press down with the weight of consequence. Stars scattered like distant witnesses to whatever choice would define the next few hours. In the reflection of her helmet visor, her brown eyes showed no hesitation, only the cold calculation of a pilot who'd learned that sometimes the right decision was also the insubordinate one. The radio crackled again. "Ghost, confirm your position and status." Instead of responding, Nix banked the Apache toward the coordinates where Bravo Team had vanished. The aircraft's nose dipped slightly as she adjusted course, and Danny's hands moved instinctively to his controls, ready to back whatever play she was about to make. The helicopter's turboshaft engines hummed with increased power, carrying them deeper into the valley where shadows moved with purpose, and every rock formation could hide an enemy position. "Ghost, you are not cleared for that vector. Return to station immediately." She switched off the radio. The mountain ridges rose around them like the walls of a natural amphitheater, their peaks crowned with ancient snow that gleamed pale in the starlight. This was country that had swallowed armies whole, where Alexander's legions had learned the price of arrogance, and Soviet forces had discovered that technology meant nothing against terrain and determination. Now it was America's turn to learn those same lessons, one patrol at a time. Danny's voice came through the intercom, calm and professional. Thermal imaging shows possible heat signatures at 270 degrees, distance approximately 4 clicks. Could be our guys, could be something else entirely. Nix adjusted their heading, bringing the Apache into a wide circle around the target area. The landscape below shifted from barren rock to sparse vegetation, the kind of terrain that offered countless hiding places for both friend and foe. Her training kicked in automatically. Scan patterns, threat assessment, situational awareness maintained through constant vigilance. But underneath the professional competence, her mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. The missing patrol had been conducting a routine reconnaissance mission, gathering intelligence on suspected Taliban supply routes through the valley. Routine missions were the ones that killed you, the ones where complacency crept in and turned soldiers into statistics. She'd seen it happen before, watched good men die, because someone had assumed the enemy would follow predictable patterns. Ghost, this is Overwatch. Respond immediately or face court-martial proceedings. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a burning vehicle. Court-martial meant the end of everything she'd worked for, the destruction of a career built on skill, determination, and the kind of courage that couldn't be taught in flight school. But it also meant that 6 soldiers might die while she followed orders from someone who'd never seen combat from the cockpit of an attack helicopter. Her decision was made before she fully realized it. The Apache continued its approach toward the thermal signatures, weapons systems armed and ready. Whatever waited in the valley ahead would determine not just the fate of Bravo team, but the trajectory of her own military career. In the darkness below, something moved with purpose, and Captain Nix Valdez prepared to discover whether her instincts were worth the consequences they were about to unleash. The thermal imaging resolved into clearer definition as they closed distance. 6 figures huddled behind a rocky outcropping, their body heat signatures distinct against the cool mountain air. But there were other signatures too, at least 12 hostiles positioned in a classic L-shaped ambush formation, waiting for reinforcements that would never come if standard protocol was followed. "I count 18 potential hostiles," Danny reported through the intercom. "Our boys are pinned down hard. They've got maybe 20 minutes before that position gets overrun." Nix's hands moved across the weapon system's controls with practiced efficiency. The Apache's 30 chain gun came online, its targeting computer painting laser designators across the enemy positions. The M230 chain gun could deliver 625 rounds per minute of high-explosive dual-purpose ammunition, each round capable of penetrating light armor and devastating personnel. But precision was everything in this kind of engagement. One mistake could turn a rescue mission into a friendly fire incident. "Ghost, this is Blackhawk 3-7, inbound to your position. Orders are to escort you back to base immediately." The new voice belonged to Major Patricia Hendricks, a pilot whose reputation for following orders was matched only by her skill at making other pilots look incompetent by comparison. She commanded the 3rd Battalion's Rapid Response Team, and her arrival meant that Nix's window for independent action was closing rapidly. "Blackhawk 3-7, Ghost. Bravo team is in immediate danger, requesting you hold position while I provide close air support." "Negative, Ghost. You are ordered to return to base. The rescue operation will proceed according to established protocol." Protocol. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. Protocol was what got soldiers killed when commanders prioritized political considerations over tactical reality. She'd seen it in Iraq, where bureaucratic delays had turned simple missions into disasters, and she was seeing it now in Afghanistan, where covering your ass was often considered more important than covering your men. Below them, muzzle flashes erupted from the Taliban positions. The enemy had decided to end the standoff, and Bravo team was about to be overrun. Nix's finger moved to the weapon release trigger, her targeting computer locked onto the largest concentration of hostile forces. The Apache's Hellfire missiles were ready, their warheads capable of eliminating entire enemy squads with surgical precision. Danny, mark targets 1 through 4. Hellfires on my command. Targets marked and locked. Weapon systems hot. The radio exploded with chatter as multiple aircraft converged on their position. Blackhawk 3-7 was 3 minutes out, accompanied by 2 additional Apache helicopters, whose pilots had orders to escort the wayward Captain Valdez back to base. But 3 minutes might as well be 3 hours when soldiers were dying below. Ghost, this is Overwatch. Stand down immediately. That is a direct order. She could hear the fury in Webb's voice, the promise of consequences that would follow her for the rest of her career. But she could also hear something else, the sound of automatic weapons fire echoing up from the valley below, the desperate last stand of American soldiers who were about to die while their support hovered overhead, paralyzed by regulation and political calculation. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The first Hellfire missile streaked downward like a falling star, its exhaust trail painting a brief line of fire across the night sky. The explosion when it hit the Taliban position was visible even from 3,000 feet, a brief flower of orange flame that eliminated 8 enemy fighters in an instant. The second missile followed 3 seconds later, targeting the machine gun nest that had been pouring fire into Bravo team's position. Ghost ceased fire immediately. But Nyx was already lining up her third shot, the 30 chain gun traversing to engage individual targets that had scattered from the main concentrations. The weapon's distinctive sound, a deep, rhythmic thunder that earned it the nickname Chainsaw, echoed across the valley as high-explosive rounds found their marks. Enemy muzzle flashes winked out one by one, the Taliban fighters either dead or fleeing deeper into the mountains. Bravo team, this is Ghost. Path is clear for immediate extraction. Mark your position with IR strobe. The response came immediately, crackling with relief and adrenaline. Ghost, Bravo team leader. We're marking now. 4 wounded, 2 critical. Request immediate medevac. She'd done it. The soldiers were alive, the enemy was neutralized, and the mission was accomplished. But even as satisfaction flooded through her, Nyx knew that the real battle was just beginning. The sound of rotors grew louder as the Blackhawk formation closed in, their pilots carrying orders that would determine whether her career survived the next few minutes. The lead Blackhawk appeared first, its distinctive twin-rotor configuration silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The US-60 Black Hawk was the workhorse of Army aviation, capable of carrying 11 combat-loaded troops or serving as a dedicated medevac platform. Tonight, it would do both, evacuating the wounded soldiers while simultaneously ending the career of the pilot who'd saved their lives. Ghost, this is Blackhawk 3-7. You are ordered to follow us back to base. Any deviation will result in immediate disciplinary action. Major Hendrick's voice carried the authority of someone who'd never had to choose between following orders and doing what was right. Her aircraft began a wide orbit around the rescue site, its searchlight illuminating the rocky terrain where Bravo team waited for extraction. The wounded soldiers were already being prepared for transport, their injuries stabilized by the team medic who'd kept them alive through 47 minutes of hell. Blackhawk 3-7, Ghost. Bravo team requires immediate medical attention. Recommend you prioritize casualty evacuation over escort duties. The casualties will be handled according to procedure, Captain. Your priority is to return to base and face the consequences of your actions. The consequences. Nyx knew what they would be: court-martial, loss of rank, possible dismissal from the service. Her military career, built over 8 years of distinguished service, would be destroyed by a single decision to prioritize American lives over administrative convenience. But as she watched the Blackhawk crew chief helping wounded soldiers aboard the aircraft, she knew she'd made the right choice. The extraction proceeded with military efficiency. Each wounded soldier was carefully loaded onto the medevac bird, their vital signs monitored by flight medics who would keep them stable during the 20-minute flight to the nearest field hospital. The team leader, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, managed a weak salute toward her Apache as he was helped aboard, his gesture barely visible in the aircraft's red-filtered interior lighting. "Ghost, form up on my 6, we're returning to base." But as Nix prepared to comply with the order, something unexpected happened. The lead Blackhawk's pilot came over the radio, his voice tight with confusion. "Control, this is Blackhawk 3-7. I'm showing some kind of insignia on the Apache that I don't recognize. Request confirmation of Ghost's unit assignment." The radio fell silent. Even Major Hendricks seemed uncertain, her aircraft hovering in place as she waited for clarification from command. The pause stretched longer than normal communications protocol allowed, and Nix realized that her past was about to catch up with her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Blackhawk 3-7, stand by for confirmation." Lieutenant Colonel Webb's voice came back online, but now it carried a different tone, not anger but something closer to shock. "Ghost, confirm your unit patch and service record." She looked down at her flight suit, where the insignia of her former unit was still visible beneath the current squadron patch. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, the unit that didn't officially exist, that conducted missions no one was supposed to know about, that had taught her skills that went far beyond standard Army aviation training. "Overwatch, Ghost. Former 160th SOAR, transferred to current unit 8 months ago under classified circumstances." The silence that followed was profound. Every pilot in the formation knew about the Night Stalkers, the legendary unit that had been involved in every major special operations mission since their formation. They were ghosts in the truest sense, appearing where needed and vanishing without trace, their existence acknowledged only by the enemies they eliminated and the American forces they supported. "Blackhawk formation, this is Overwatch. Maintain current position pending further orders." Major Hendricks' voice came back online, but now it carried a note of uncertainty. "Ghost, is it true you were 160th? What was your mission classification?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a burning building. Nix's service record with the Night Stalkers was classified at levels that most officers would never see, filled with missions that had no official documentation and operations that had shaped the course of the war on terror. Her transfer to a regular Apache unit had been presented as a routine reassignment, but the truth was far more complex. "Classified Major, above your clearance level." The response was calculated to create exactly the effect it achieved. In the military hierarchy, classification levels were sacred, and questioning someone's clearance was tantamount to questioning their authority. But more than that, it reminded everyone listening that Captain Nix Valdez was not just another pilot. She was someone with connections and experience that went far beyond their understanding. "Ghost, this is Blackhawk 3-7. Request clarification on your current mission status." But before she could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. It was crisp, professional, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone who didn't need to identify himself. "All aircraft, this is Phantom Base. Ghost is cleared for independent operation under special authority. Blackhawk formation, return to base immediately." The call sign was one that most pilots had never heard, but those who had recognized it immediately. Phantom Base was the communications hub for classified operations, the voice that spoke for missions that didn't officially exist. Its intervention meant that Nix's actions were being evaluated by people far above Lieutenant Colonel Webb's pay grade. "Phantom Base, this is Blackhawk 3-7. Confirm authority for independent operation." "Confirmed 3-7. Ghost is operating under Special Operations Authority. Your mission is complete. Return to base." The dismissal was absolute. One by one, the Blackhawk formation broke off and headed back toward the main base, their pilots no doubt wondering what they'd stumbled into. But Major Hendrick's aircraft lingered, its pilot clearly wrestling with questions that she couldn't voice over open channels. "Ghost, this is 3-7. Are you going to be okay?" The question was personal, one soldier to another, and it carried more weight than any official communication. Nix realized that her reputation had preceded her, that stories of her service with the Night Stalkers had filtered through the aviation community in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Affirmative, 3-7. Take care of those wounded soldiers." "Copy that, Ghost, and Captain, thanks for doing the right thing." The Blackhawk disappeared into the night, carrying its precious cargo of wounded but living American soldiers. Nix was alone again, her Apache hovering above the valley where she'd made the decision that would define the rest of her career. But now she wasn't sure whether that definition would be positive or negative. "Ghost, this is Phantom Base. Report to alternate landing zone Alpha 7 for debriefing. Coordinates being transmitted now." The coordinates appeared on her navigation display, pointing toward a location she didn't recognize. It was 60 miles north of the main base, in a sector that was officially uninhabited but showed signs of recent activity on her thermal imaging. Whatever waited for her there would determine whether her intervention had been vindicated or whether she'd simply delayed her court-martial by a few hours. Danny's voice came through the intercom, quiet and thoughtful. "Ghost, what exactly did you do before you came to our unit?" The question was one she'd been avoiding for 8 months, ever since her transfer from the Night Stalkers had been processed under circumstances that left more questions than answers. Her service record was clean, her performance exemplary, but there were gaps in her file that suggested missions no one was supposed to know about. "I did what needed to be done, Danny, just like tonight." "And what did that cost you?" She didn't answer immediately. The truth was complicated, involving a mission in Syria that had gone wrong, a decision that had saved American lives but violated international law, and a transfer that had been presented as punishment but felt more like protection. The Night Stalkers took care of their own, even when their own made choices that couldn't be officially sanctioned. "More than I expected, less than it was worth." They flew in silence toward the coordinates, the Apache's navigation system guiding them through valleys and mountain passes that seemed untouched by human presence. But Nix knew better. In Afghanistan, empty terrain was never truly empty, and the most dangerous places were often the ones that appeared safest. The landing zone materialized out of the darkness like a mirage, a flat stretch of desert surrounded by low hills, illuminated by infrared markers that were invisible to anyone without night vision equipment. 3 vehicles were parked at the perimeter, their engines running and their occupants waiting with the patience of professionals who were accustomed to late-night meetings in hostile territory. "Ghost, this is Phantom Base. Set down at designated coordinates and await further instructions." She brought the Apache down with the precision that had made her reputation, the aircraft's landing gear touching the desert floor with barely a tremor. The rotors continued turning, ready for immediate takeoff if the situation required it. But as the dust settled around them, Nix realized that whatever was about to happen would determine not just her immediate future, but the trajectory of her entire military career. A figure emerged from the lead vehicle, walking toward the Apache with the confident stride of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed without question. Even in the darkness, she could see the silver eagles on his collar, the insignia of a full colonel who carried himself with the authority of someone who'd spent his career making decisions that others would live or die by. "Captain Valdez, I'm Colonel Harrison. We need to talk." The voice was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. But there was something in his tone that suggested their conversation would be about more than just tonight's mission. He gestured toward the vehicles, where other figures waited in the shadows, their faces hidden but their posture suggesting the kind of professional competence that came from years of classified operations. Danny shut her down. This might take a while. Her co-pilot nodded, his hands moving across the controls with practiced efficiency. The Apache's engines wound down, their high-pitched whine fading into the desert silence. But even as the aircraft powered down, Nix kept her personal weapon readily accessible, her training reminding her that in Afghanistan, appearances were often deceiving. "Colonel Harrison," she said, climbing down from the cockpit, "I assume this is about tonight's mission." "Among other things, Captain. Your actions this evening have created certain complications that require immediate attention." The understatement was so profound that it almost made her laugh. Complications. She disobeyed direct orders, engaged enemy forces without authorization, and forced a classified intervention that had revealed connections she'd hoped to keep buried. Complications seemed like an inadequate description for the situation she'd created. "I saved 6 American lives, sir. If that creates complications, then the system is broken." "The system is exactly what it's designed to be, Captain. The question is whether you're still suited to operate within it." The words hung in the desert air like a challenge. Around them, the vehicle's occupants remained motionless, their silence suggesting that this conversation was being recorded and analyzed by people who would determine her fate based on every word she spoke. The stars above seemed to press down with the weight of consequence, and Nix realized that her career was balanced on the edge of a knife that could cut either way. "I'm suited to save American lives, Colonel. Everything else is negotiable." Harrison studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, Captain, because we have a proposition for you." The proposition, as it turned out, was both simpler and more complex than she'd anticipated. Colonel Harrison represented a joint task force that operated in the gray areas between official military policy and operational necessity. They needed pilots who could make hard decisions under pressure, who understood that sometimes the right choice was also the insubordinate one. "Your service record with the 160th is impressive, Captain, but your actions tonight demonstrate something even more valuable: the ability to prioritize mission accomplishment over career advancement." He gestured toward the vehicles, where other members of the task force waited with the patience of professionals who understood that some conversations couldn't be rushed. "We operate in situations where standard protocol is inadequate, where commanders need pilots who can think independently and act decisively." "And what would that involve exactly?" "Missions that don't officially exist, operations that require the highest level of security clearance. The kind of work that the Night Stalkers do, but with even less oversight and more operational flexibility." The offer was tempting in ways that went beyond professional advancement. It represented a return to the kind of meaningful work she'd been doing before her transfer, the operations that made a real difference in the war on terror. But it also meant accepting that her career would be defined by missions she could never discuss, successes that would never be publicly acknowledged. "What about tonight's incident, the insubordination charges?" "What incident, Captain? According to our records, you responded to a classified emergency requiring immediate intervention. Your actions saved American lives and eliminated a significant enemy threat. Lieutenant Colonel Webb will be commended for his unit's exceptional performance." The elegant solution was typical of the way classified operations worked. Reality was whatever the people with the highest clearance levels said it was. Her disobedience would be transformed into exemplary service, her insubordination would become tactical innovation, and her near court-martial would disappear into the bureaucratic machinery that protected national security. "And my current assignment would be terminated immediately. Your transfer to the Joint Task Force would be processed under the same classified authorities that brought you here tonight." Danny appeared at her shoulder, his expression questioning. He'd been watching the conversation from a distance, no doubt wondering whether his pilot was about to disappear into the same black hole that had produced her in the first place. The Night Stalkers had a reputation for recruiting exceptional pilots and then making them vanish into missions that didn't officially exist. "Colonel, my co-pilot has been with me for 8 months. He's a good man and a skilled aviator. Chief Warrant Officer Reeves is welcome to join the task force if he's interested. We can always use experienced aviators who understand the importance of discretion." The offer extended to Danny was a courtesy, but also a recognition that their partnership had been effective. In the close quarters of an Apache cockpit, trust was everything, and finding co-pilots who could work seamlessly with classified operations was harder than recruiting primary pilots. "What's the mission profile?" Danny asked, his voice carrying the same professional tone he used during combat operations. "Counterterrorism, special operations support, and what we call diplomatic intervention. The kind of work that prevents larger conflicts by eliminating specific threats before they can metastasize." It was a euphemistic description of assassination missions, targeted strikes against terrorist leaders, and operations that shaped the geopolitical landscape in ways that were never acknowledged by official sources. The kind of work that had made her reputation with the Night Stalkers, but also the kind of work that had led to her transfer when one mission had gone spectacularly wrong. "Colonel, I need to know about operational oversight. Who determines target selection and mission authorization?" "That would be classified above your current clearance level, Captain. But I can tell you that we operate under the direct authority of the National Security Council, with oversight from the Joint Chiefs of Staff." The answer was both reassuring and terrifying. It meant that the missions would be sanctioned at the highest levels of government, but it also meant that if something went wrong, the pilots involved would be completely expendable. The Night Stalkers had taught her that lesson the hard way, during a mission in Syria that had required her to choose between following orders and preventing a massacre. "What happened in Syria won't happen again," she said quietly. Harrison's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested that he knew exactly what she was referring to. "Syria was a learning experience for everyone involved, Captain. The oversight procedures have been refined since then." The euphemism was another reminder that her service record contained missions that had shaped current policy, operations that had taught hard lessons about the consequences of operating in legal gray areas. But it also suggested that the task force represented an evolution of those earlier programs, a more sophisticated approach to the same basic mission. "How much time do I have to decide?" "The transport leaves in 30 minutes, Captain. If you're not on it, you'll return to your current assignment and face whatever consequences Lieutenant Colonel Webb deems appropriate." The ultimatum was delivered with the calm professionalism that characterized all of Harrison's communications. But underneath the formal tone, she could hear the suggestion that her current assignment might not be as secure as she'd assumed. Webb had been looking for reasons to remove her from his command, and tonight's actions had given him exactly what he needed. "Danny, what do you think?" Her co-pilot considered the question with the same methodical approach he brought to target analysis. "I think we're good at what we do, and tonight proved that we're willing to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. If this task force needs people like that, then maybe that's where we belong." The simple assessment captured the essence of her own feelings about the situation. She joined the military to serve her country, but she'd stayed because she was good at saving American lives. If the task force could provide better opportunities to do that job, then the decision was already made. "Colonel Harrison, we're in." The acceptance was immediate and irrevocable. Within minutes, their personal gear was being transferred to the waiting vehicles, and the Apache was being prepared for transport back to the main base. The aircraft would be returned to the unit inventory, its maintenance records showing nothing more than a routine night training mission. "Captain, there's one more thing you should know about your new assignment." Harrison's tone suggested that whatever he was about to reveal would be significant. Your call sign will remain Ghost, but now it will have official sanction. The Joint Task Force operates under the designation Phantom Squadron, and your missions will be coordinated through assets that most military personnel don't know exist. The revelation explained the radio call from Phantom Base, the mysterious authority that had overridden Webb's orders and provided official cover for her actions. She'd been recruited by the same organization that had protected her, their intervention carefully orchestrated to create the circumstances that would bring her into their fold. How long have you been watching me? Since Syria, Captain. Your actions there demonstrated exactly the kind of independent thinking we need for our operations. The admission was both flattering and unsettling. It meant that her transfer to the regular Apache unit had been part of a longer recruitment process, a way of testing her abilities under more conventional military constraints. Tonight's mission had been the final examination, and her decision to prioritize American lives over career advancement had earned her a passing grade. The transport vehicles were military specification, but unmarked, their interiors configured for long-distance travel through hostile territory. As they pulled away from the landing zone, Nix watched the desert landscape roll past the bulletproof windows, each mile taking her further from the military career she'd known and closer to a future that remained largely undefined. Colonel, what can you tell me about the other pilots in the squadron? They're all volunteers, Captain. Most of them have backgrounds similar to yours: Night Stalkers, Air Force Special Operations, Marine Corps reconnaissance. The kind of aviators who understand that some missions require more than technical skill. The description suggested a unit composed entirely of pilots who'd been selected for their ability to operate independently, to make hard decisions under pressure, and to accept the consequences of those decisions. It was exactly the kind of environment where her skills would be most valuable, but also the kind of environment where mistakes would be magnified and failure would be final. What about operational security? How do we maintain cover for classified missions? That's handled at levels above your clearance, Captain. Your job is to fly the missions and complete the objectives. Everything else is managed by people who specialize in making inconvenient realities disappear. The answer was both reassuring and ominous. It suggested that the task force had resources and capabilities that went far beyond conventional military units, but it also implied that those resources came with obligations and constraints that might not be immediately apparent. As the vehicles continued their journey through the Afghan night, Nix found herself thinking about the soldiers she'd saved earlier that evening. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and his team would recover from their wounds, return to their families, and continue their lives without ever knowing that their rescue had been the catalyst for a much larger chain of events. Their survival had been worth the risk she'd taken, but it had also committed her to a path that would define the rest of her military career. The stars above seemed different now, arranged in patterns that suggested possibilities rather than limitations. She was no longer just Captain Nix Valdez, regular Army aviator with a problematic tendency toward insubordination. She was Ghost, pilot for Phantom Squadron, and her missions would be the kind that shaped the course of history in ways that were never officially acknowledged. But as the desert passed by outside the vehicle windows, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something larger and more dangerous than she'd anticipated. The Night Stalkers had taught her that classified operations always carried hidden costs, and tonight's rescue mission had been just the beginning of a journey that would test every skill she'd developed and every principle she'd sworn to uphold. The convoy reached its destination as dawn began to paint the eastern horizon with shades of gold and crimson. The base was unlike anything she'd seen before, a collection of hardened buildings and aircraft hangars that seemed to have been carved directly from the mountainside. The helicopters parked on the flight line were a mixture of conventional military aircraft and modified versions that she didn't recognize. their configurations suggesting capabilities that went beyond standard aviation specifications. "Welcome to Phantom Base, Captain," Harrison said as they climbed out of the vehicles. "This is where your real career begins." The base was a testament to the resources that were available to truly classified operations. The hangars contained aircraft that didn't appear in any official inventory, their modifications suggesting capabilities that bordered on science fiction. The pilots she could see working on the flight line moved with the confident efficiency of professionals who were accustomed to operating equipment that pushed the boundaries of current technology. "Colonel, what exactly are we flying here?" "Modified Apache longbows primarily, but also some experimental aircraft that are being field tested for future deployment. The modifications are classified, but I can tell you that they significantly extend the aircraft's range, stealth capability, and weapons systems." The description was tantalizing but frustratingly vague. She could see the aircraft in question, their familiar silhouettes altered by additions and modifications that suggested capabilities far beyond standard military helicopters. Whatever technology was being tested here represented the cutting edge of military aviation, and she was being invited to be part of its development. "When do we start?" "Your first mission briefing is in 6 hours, Captain. I suggest you use the time to get settled and familiarize yourself with the base facilities. Your quarters are in Building 7, and your aircraft assignment will be determined after your initial qualification flights." The dismissal was polite but firm, and Nix realized that her orientation would be largely self-directed. The base operated on the assumption that its personnel were capable of independent action, that they could adapt to new environments without extensive hand-holding. It was exactly the kind of environment that would appeal to pilots who'd been selected for their ability to think independently. Danny appeared at her shoulder, his expression a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. "Well, Ghost, looks like we're not in Kansas anymore." The reference to Dorothy's famous observation was apt, but also deeply ironic. They'd been transported to a world where the normal rules of military service didn't apply, where their missions would be defined by objectives that might not be officially acknowledged, and where their success would be measured by standards that remained largely undefined. "No, Danny, we're not, but I think we're exactly where we need to be." The base came alive as the sun rose higher, its personnel beginning their daily routines with the professional efficiency that characterized all successful military operations. But there was something different about the atmosphere here, a sense of purpose that went beyond conventional military objectives. These were people who understood that their work had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Her quarters were Spartan but comfortable, equipped with everything she needed for extended deployment to hostile territory. The walls were bare except for a single photograph, an image of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment's Insignia, the same unit patch that had caused such confusion during the previous night's mission. Someone had placed it there deliberately, a reminder of where she'd come from and what she'd accomplished. But as she unpacked her gear and prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, Nix couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something that would test not just her skills as a pilot, but her ability to navigate the complex moral landscape of classified operations. The Night Stalkers had taught her that the most dangerous missions were often the ones that seemed straightforward, and her intuition suggested that her service with Phantom Squadron would be anything but simple. The first mission briefing was scheduled for 1400 hours, giving her time to explore the base and begin to understand the environment where she would be working.